I'm doing something different today. I'm going to be cooking miso soup on my Inductance stovetop that I installed in my boat a few years ago. I'm going to be using shore power to cook with. I do have a lithium iron phosphate battery bank that I built. It's over 10,000 watt hours of storage, and I have a 5,000 watt Ames industrial marine grade power inverter, but I don't have those hooked up yet. The battery's hooked up, the inverter is not hooked up yet. So I'll be cooking with shore power. But at any rate, this is what it's like cooking on a boat with inductance cooking. So the first thing is, for inductance stoves to work, your pots and pans have to be magnetic. So they can't be pure stainless steel. If a magnet won't stick to your pots and pans, then they will not work on an inductance stovetop. So if you're ever going to get into getting an inductance stovetop, you got to make sure that your cookware is magnetic. And you can just use a magnet and test your pots and pans at home to see. A lot of pots and pans look like stainless steel and say they're stainless steel, but they're still magnetic and they will work. I have this German-made pressure cooker. It's really a good, high-quality pressure cooker, and it is not magnetic. Magnets will not stick to it, so this will not work on my inductance stovetop. But I came up with a trick, and it works really well. And I use my saute skillet, my very well seasoned skillet here, and this is magnetic, so it is supposedly stainless steel, but it is magnetic. And I guess they just don't remove all the iron out of the steel to when they create stainless. I think that's how they do it. So what I do is I set my pressure cooker on top, and this gets hot, and then it heats this. And what's nice about this is this pressure cooker, the steam will come out when it first starts up, and there's a little valve right under the handle here, and so it'll sweat and it'll drip. And also the gasket in here, this thing's pretty old. It's like over 30 years old, and the gasket leaks a little bit, so it'll drip. But the nice thing is that it drips into the skillet, so it doesn't make a mess on my stove. Inductance stovetops are glass, so you have to be careful not to damage them. And also, one thing about them is that if you're cooking and you get water underneath your pots and pans onto the glass, it gets hot. What happens is the water has minerals in it, so you'll get mineral deposits on the glass on your stovetop, and it's very difficult to clean. You really have to scrape the hell out of it. So any rate, so that's how this works. Now I'm not going to be pressure cooking my miso soup. I'm just using this pot because the reason is I'll take the lid off and I won't use the lid at all. But I like this lid, it locks on, and so when I'm done making the soup and after it cools down, I put it in my refrigerator, and that way I don't have to make another bowl dirty or whatever for storage or another container. This works as the container for the soup, so this works out really good. And I do make my miso soup a little strong at first because I like to have it for most of the week, several days, 3, 4, maybe, you probably shouldn't go over 4 days really with food. But I do sometimes. I'll go 4 days, but I will add, as long as you keep it good and cold, it should be okay. And but I'll add water to it, over the course of, as it starts to go down a little bit, I'll add a little more water to it and stir it back up. And so I can be eating this for, a few days. And but at any rate, this soup is really easy to make, and it's kind of my own recipe. And so I'm going to take the lid off, and I'm only going to be using this on top of the skillet. And I can set this aside. Okay, so these are the ingredients that I use. I start off with garlic, and I like elephant garlic because I don't like breaking up a whole bunch of little tiny cloves and shelling them and dealing with that. One of these cloves on here is plenty. So, and I usually use the whole clove. I mean, garlic's really good for you, and I love garlic, so it's not a problem. I use a yellow onion, one big large yellow onion, and shiitake mushrooms. And I got, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 to 10 shiitake mushrooms, normal size, and then cabbage too. I just use regular cabbage. Then I also add a lot of black pepper, and black pepper is a superfood. It's amazing how healthy black pepper is for you. Google it and look, and it's just, I mean, it helps for everything, from cardiovascular to your nervous system to even depression, and it flushes out and cleanses toxins out of your body. I mean, inflammation, it goes on and on and on. I mean, there's no end to the benefits of black pepper. I use a lot of black pepper in my soup. It's awesome. I also use the sriracha, and this is like I think it's got to be fermented because this doesn't have any lectins. Now I'm cooking this. I've been on this low lectin diet mainly because I did damage my back. I worked on a research farm for 19 years, and I just started getting shooting pain down my leg. At first, I just kind of laughed it off, and it just kept getting worse and worse, and it got to the point where my whole back was in so much pain, and I couldn't even hardly walk. I thought I was going to lose my job, and I didn't have health insurance at the time, and so it was a really bad situation. Luckily, I didn't get fired. I worked every day and got out there, but I was in excruciating pain, and so my back has gotten better, but I do still get hip pain and pain down my leg. I never had an MRI or anything, but I think I've either probably have a slip disc maybe, or a herniated disc in my lower back. So I was having so much bad hip pain that I could hardly walk. And again, this is within the last 3 years. I started having this bad hip pain again, and I was worried I was going to lose the job that I'm working at now, and lose my boat. This is my home, and so it was a really bad situation. And I found out about lectins in the diet, which was interesting because I worked in horticulture research and development for, like I said, 19 years, and what lectins are they're plant poisons to protect the plant from predators like insects and also animals, and they really mess you up. And unfortunately, lectins are in a lot of food. Almost everything I love to eat is full of lectins. Any nightshade plants are full of lectins. So that's all peppers, tomatoes, and eggplant, and there's a lot of other foods that have high lectins, like potatoes and all kinds of beans and seeds and nuts. Some of them are better than others, or have less lectins than others. But I found out that lectins can it messes with your immune system, and your immune system is what causes inflammation and joint pain. And so I decided to go on this low lectin diet 3 years ago, and the main problem that I have is bread. I mean, to me, a meal is not a meal without bread, and I've eaten it almost every day of my life since I was a little kid, probably every day of my life since I was able to eat solid food, and probably never missed a day. And so I quit eating bread, and I do eat bread now. I go back on it. I do eat sourdough bread, which is a little bit better. Whole grains are really bad because the hull on the seeds are what protect the seeds, so they're really high in lectins. So you can go to eating white bread, but that spikes your blood sugar. I stopped eating bread, and I cut out all the lectins out of my diet, And in 24 hours, the first day that I got on this diet, half of my hip pain was gone. 3 days later, it was almost totally gone. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so, you know, this diet's very hard to stay on because there's not a lot of foods that don't have lectins in them. And so you got to just research it. You know, foods low in lectins or foods that don't have lectins. You can Google that and find out. And so I went on the diet and pretty good for quite a few months, and I felt great. I mean, I didn't feel 30 years younger. I mean, I felt like I was a little kid again. I couldn't believe how good I felt. And but then, you know, the holidays roll around and I go back to eating the old-fashioned food that I used to eat and grew up with, and when you stop eating lectins, my joint pain went away really quick. The problem is when I start eating foods high in lectins, the joint pain comes back really quick. So within a day or two. So I've been kind of experimenting going in and out with this diet and noticing how quick the reaction is to it. So at any rate, so I kind of come up with this soup here as one of the things that I like to eat, and so there's really basically no lectins in it at all. So so at any rate, this is fermented. The sriracha, mainly peppers, are very high in lectins, and like tomatoes and peppers, it's the skin and the seeds that are high in lectins. And if you peel them and take the seeds out, then they're okay. Another thing you can do, like with peppers, is ferment them. If fermentation destroys the lectins. So if it's fermented, which this is, there shouldn't be any lectins in this. And so I like hot, spicy food, so this is awesome. And when I worked on the research farm, it was interesting. I know a lot of plant breeders and people that do research, horticulture research, don't realize this. We didn't at the time because we didn't even know anything about lectins. And but we would grow several varieties. I mean, like we had like hundreds of varieties of, say, bell peppers that we have. We develop all these different varieties, and we'd go out and evaluate them in the field. So we'd grow a 10-foot section of one variety, and then on the same bed another 10-foot section of a different variety, and so on and so on and so on. All these different varieties of peppers. And we noticed that one variety would be loaded down with insects, and the insects are just killing the plant, eating it up, and like aphids. And so those were the main insects that attack peppers, and they spread disease. We'd noticed that one variety would just be loaded with aphids, which are little, people pronounce it either aphis or aphids. They're little tiny, teeny bugs that they suck the juices out of the plant, and they spread disease, and they can kill the plant from different types of viruses. And so we would notice that some of the varieties, like one variety would just be loaded with aphids, and the variety next to it, which is a different variety, had absolutely none on it. And it's like, well, why is this variety has so many, bugs on it? And so what we started to do is that when we do selection, and then eventually these peppers will go into production, we would have to decide on which ones are going to go in production and which ones weren't. And so we would choose the ones that didn't have bugs on them, because we thought, okay, this is great. This is good all the way around. For one thing, farmers use less pesticides if they're going to not be organic farmers. And pesticides are very expensive, and nobody really cares to have pesticides on their food. So the consumer's better off because less spray on the foods, the healthier it is. And I think now the problem is these varieties that we're selecting that didn't have bugs on them. The reason why they didn't have bugs on them is those varieties were higher in lectins. And so I think over time, our food source in the grocery store is getting more and more lectins in the foods because of this selection work. I know plant breeders have been doing this for a long time. You'll select the plants that are going to produce the best fruit or vegetables, and that are going to have the least amount of attraction to bugs. And so I think that's why you see a lot of people walking and having joint pain. When I go to the grocery store, I notice somebody walking, having a hard time walking, and I look in their shopping basket, and I can obviously see why they're walking the way they're walking. And unfortunately, most people don't know this, but I know it works for me, and it's worked for a lot of people. So at any rate, let's get on with the miso soup. So what I do is I start off with garlic. The research farm I worked at, it was really interesting. We developed the biggest carrots in the world. They were huge. They were like this big and this big around and straight like a cylinder all the way down. They were so sweet. They were more like eating an apple than a carrot. We developed the tallest celery in the world, stalks that were over 3 feet long, from where it grows out of the ground to the second node on the stalk. We developed, I think we're the first to develop jalapeno peppers with no heat in them, and the reason for that was we developed this product called dial-a-heat, and when you're making, like say you're making and canning the salsa for production for the market, people will buy some salsa, and it was hard to control the heat, and some people are real sensitive to hot food, and it says mild on it, and it's a little too hot for them. Or there's other people like really hot food, and it says hot on it, but it's really not that hot. So this dial-a-heat was, you take these peppers that had absolutely no heat, and you'd make salsa, and then you'd use heat extract and add it into the process, and to add the heat in, so you can dial in the amount of heat that you want in the product. Any rate, most of the work that we did at the research farm was for dehydration. So vegetables ended up going into I think products like a cup of soup and stovetop stuffing, I think was another one of where our products ended up. So it was really interesting. I actually miss it working there. It ended up closing down. And we were the first people in the world to develop garlic that instead of putting this clove in the ground, because that's how you plant garlic, you take this a clove, you break your garlic up into the smaller pieces here, and then you put this in the ground, and it'll grow back, and then it'll produce a big bulb like this. But the problem is you have to put this in upright in the right position for it to grow. If you put it in upside down, it won't grow. And so it's very tedious labor. And the problem with garlic seed, because they do seed out, is they have a hole around the seed that was so hard that the seed wouldn't grow if you tried to plant it. And so we bred out that hole, weakened it. So now you can actually plant garlic seed. And so you can imagine planting 100 acres by hand with people sticking these in the ground, or planting it with seed with a tractor with all these hoppers and plant 10 rows wide and just fast right through the field and plant out the seeds and be done with it. So that's what I was doing for several years, and it was real interesting. So now I'm going to take this one big hunkin' piece of garlic here, and it's going to go in the soup. So I just cut it up small, into small pieces, kind of mince them. There's the garlic. Now I'm going to go ahead and just cut this onion. I like to use a great big onion, So quite a bit of garlic. Ouch, don't cut yourself. And quite a bit of onion. So I like to buy organic when I can. But I always wondered, these little labels they put on organic fruits and vegetables, I wonder how organic they are. So yeah, at the research farm, we grew everything pretty much. I've grown, when you walk into a supermarket, into the produce section, pretty much everything in there I've grown. There's a few things I haven't grown, like pineapple. But pretty much everything else. Lettuce, cabbage, broccoli, kale, endive, cilantro, every kind of pepper, tomatoes, corn, you name it, I've grown it. Okay, once I get the onion peeled and cut in half and peeled, I got 2 halves now of this onion. I like to start my stove up. Nice thing about inductance stoves is they heat up really fast. You can boil water within seconds, not minutes, but less than a minute. You can have water boiling, a small amount. If it's a big pot of water, it takes a little longer. So I kick this on and I go up to the highest heat. So I'm at 1800 watts right now. That's as high as this unit goes. And that'll heat it up fast. Now while that's heating up, I'm going to go ahead and cut this onion up into large chunks. So you don't want to make it fine. You just want pretty good sized pieces. So I cut the half in half again like that. And then I cut it a couple ways this way and a couple ways that way. So they're like 1-inch size squares, or maybe a little bigger, which makes it quick and easy. You don't have to do a lot of chopping. And it's interesting, some onions make me cry and some don't make me cry at all. This one is not making me cry, so that's a good thing. I'm going to take some olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. And the thing about olive oil is that there's a lot of fake olive oil on the market. And so what I like to look for is not an expiration date, but a harvest date, because that means it came out of the same grove all at the same time. It was harvested on the same day. So you know this is all pure 100% olive oil. And any rate, yeah, this is really good stuff. It's a product from Italy, and it's expensive, but I love it. And you can't consume too much olive oil. This is one of the healthiest things that you can put in your body is olive oil. And you can cook with it. There's myth that you say, oh, you shouldn't cook with olive oil. That's not good. The olive oil converts and it's not good for you. Well, that's not true. So you can cook with it, and that's what I like cooking with. So I put this in a hot pan, and I put quite a bit in. I don't know how much it would be if I measured it, but it coats the bottom of the pan pretty good. And so now it's heated up, and I'm getting a little whiff of smoke here, so I'm going to cut it back on the heat, back down to 900 watts, and I'm going to throw the garlic in first. A lot of people say don't throw the garlic in first, you'll burn it, but just don't get your pan too hot. And I like the garlic to fuse into the olive oil a little bit. And then I immediately put in, again, if you don't get the pan too hot, you're not going to burn your garlic. So, and now I throw in the onion immediately afterwards and then stir it up. Now, if you're sauteing and you're using brandy and you want flames to shoot up out of your saute pan, then yeah, you have to have real high heat from the get-go. So you might not want to put the garlic in first. You might want to put the onions in first. And then I just stir it around And the trick to making the soup, which is pretty much the trick to all cooking, is knowing how much to cook everything you're putting in. So I want to cook these onions until they're translucent a little bit, but I don't want to overcook them because then they end up soggy. So that's the trick. You just got to judge how well cooked it is, and then also anticipate that because I'm going to be putting water in here and it's going to be boiling, and they're going to still cook in the boiling water. So you don't want to overcook them when you're sauteing them, but you don't want to under saute them either, because then they're going to be too crunchy. And the pieces kind of break up and fall apart as you cook them. Okay, I'm gonna kick this heat back up again. I'm up to 1300 watts right now. This stove, you can either go, it lets you adjust it from either going by watts or by temperature. And I'm so used to cooking it, using it, and adjusting it by wattage. So it gives you, a few, probably, I don't know, about 5 different choices of levels of heat. It's about the size of the pieces that I like in there. So they're pretty big. So they'll start to change color from white, and then they'll start to kind of turn a yellowish color. And once they start yellowing, then that's pretty much done for sauteing. Okay, that's good. So now I'm going to crank the heat all the way up. So I'm going to put water in here. Now, of course, whenever you're cooking with oil and you add water to something that has oil in it, you got to be really extremely careful because it can splatter. I've done this so many times now, I don't really have a problem with it. So it shouldn't splatter at all, and I just pour it in slowly. So I'm using mountain spring water. Just pour it in slowly. There it goes. Now I'll fill the pot up with water and leave about a little more than an inch from the top, because I'm gonna be adding in cabbage and mushrooms, and also the miso. I'm gonna add black pepper and the sriracha, and I use a lot of black pepper, so this stuff's really healthy. And this is one of those grinder kinds, so I'm going to grind in probably about 30 grinds into this. Okay, there's 30. And you know what? I think I'm going to add in more than that. I'm going to go 40. Okay, 40 grinds on this. And now I'm going to put some of this in, and I like it spicy. I put in quite a bit. I'm going to shake it up first, and so it depends on how hot you like it. I don't like it so hot it like burns your mouth. One of the problems with food that's too hot, you can't taste the other food in the food. All you taste is the heat. So you don't want to put way too much in, but I do put quite a bit in. I like it hot. So about like that. Okay, now as that's heating up, I'll go ahead and cut up the cabbage and the mushrooms. I just let this water heat up until it starts to boil, and then by the time it's boiling, I should have my cabbage and my mushrooms cut up, and then I'll add the cabbage next. And this is organic cabbage, but I still like to just kind of be on the safe side. I'll peel the outer layer off and get rid of it. So probably don't have to do this because I'm going to boil it anyway, but you never know. Just make it a little safer, and this kind of is not in the best shape anyway on the outer leaves. Now it's probably a good idea if you're buying cabbage that's not organic, that's got spray on it, because usually fungicides are what they spray on cabbage. You grow cabbage mainly in the winter time, and so you gotta let it rain and stuff, and so it'd probably be a good idea to just get rid of the outer layer first. Okay, so now I'm gonna just cut a big chunk of this off. So there's the stem of the cabbage, and I just cut over to one side. I don't cut it right in half. I just kind of cut around that piece, and I'll cut a chunk of this off. I love cabbage, and again, it's really healthy. So I'll take about this much here, and again, I cut it up into big pieces, just like the onions. I did 3 cuts in one direction, and I'm going to do 3 cuts in the other direction. Just kind of like how I did the onions. I think I just did 2 cuts with the onions, but I'll do 3 with this. It's bigger than an onion. So what I like to do is I'll just wash them right in the bag here. Water in the bag, kind of swish them around and dump the water out of the bag. Usually by the time I get the cabbage and the mushrooms cut up, and then the water's boiling, and then I'll put the cabbage in next. The mushrooms, you got to be careful with them. They go in last, and they don't cook for very long, just a minute or 2 in boiling water. I do that mainly just to kind of sterilize them, you know, in case anything's on them. But the thing with mushrooms, if you boil them and boil them and boil them, the mushrooms just disappear. Okay, it'll still taste like mushroom in the soup, but you won't have no mushrooms floating around in the soup. They'll totally dissolve. So, like I said, I throw them in boiling water for maybe 1 minute, and then I shut the heat off. Oh, I love these shiitake mushrooms. Okay, when I cut up the mushrooms, I cut them into pretty thick chunks, again, because I do that so they don't dissolve. If you cut them up real thin, they're going to dissolve. Cooking at the dock is pretty easy, but cooking out at sea in rough conditions is very difficult. When I moved my other boat from Santa Cruz up to the San Francisco Bay, I did a night run, and I motored. I'd put a Lehman 60 horsepower engine in and installed it, and I had to get out of there because they only allow you to stay so long when you buy a boat there. And like a lot of marinas, you buy it and they kick you out. Especially if there's a waiting list for slips, which a lot of marinas now are full. Okay, my water's boiling, and I went down to make coffee in the morning, and it was really rough. I mean, the swells were huge. I was advised not to go out by a couple that were on a fishing trawler. They just came in and they said, "Don't go out there, it's too rough." Well, I told them I have to go, and so the swells were big. I mean, probably 15 feet, I'd imagine. But from like the bottom of the swell to the trough to the top of the swell was like 30 feet, and it was unbelievable. And when I went down to make coffee, I literally had to lean against the counter like this, with both of my legs kind of spread apart, and hold on with one hand and try to make coffee with the other hand. And when you go over the top of a wave, you'd actually become weightless. And then when you got to the bottom, you felt like you weighed 400 pounds, and over and over and over, you know, constantly just wears you out. Okay, so the water's been boiling for about a minute now, and it's good rolling boil. I don't want to overboil my onions, so now I'm going to throw in the cabbage, and it'll stop boiling because the cabbage is cold. It'll stop boiling, so careful, you don't want to burn yourself. So I throw in the cabbage, and now I'll kind of push the cabbage down into the water. Make sure it's down in there, and then I wait for it to start boiling again, which will only take a minute or so. And then after it boils for once it starts boiling again, I let it boil for another minute or so, and not too long, because I don't want to overcook my cabbage either. I don't want it crunchy, but I don't want it soggy either. So that's one of the tricks to cooking, is knowing each vegetable that you're cooking, and you might be cooking several different types of vegetables together, you want to put the ones in that take longer to cook first, and the stuff that cooks really quick you want to put in later or last. And that's why I put the mushrooms in very last. And if you do it right, the textures of everything in the soup, like for instance this miso soup, the textures of everything, the onions, the cabbage, the mushrooms turn out perfect, and it's awesome. The soup Nazi has nothing on me when it comes to this miso soup. Yeah, your knees will buckle. You'll have to sit down when you eat it. I can eat this stuff every day. I can eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's how much I like it. Now, soybeans are high in lectins, and that's what miso is made out of, but it's fermented, so supposedly that destroys the lectins. And I get this is called white miso, which is not white, but it's tan color. But I like the lighter. You can get darker miso, but this is what I use. And matter of fact, what's left in here, I'm going to put most of this in. I'm going to save a little bit out because in a day or two I'm going to add more water, and sometimes I'll add more miso because I don't want it to get too watery. So so at any rate, but that's about the amount I'll use for this size pot. Okay, the cabbage is boiling now, so I'm going to let it boil for about a minute. So I can see the onions look perfect. They're not overcooked. The cabbage is cooking right now, and it still has about 30 more seconds to go. So this is really super simple and pretty quick. I can usually get it done in about 45 minutes from start to finish, completely start to finish. I see people doing cooking stuff on YouTube and stuff, and they'll say, oh, it only takes 10 minutes, but they got everything prepped. They got everything chopped up, and and all these little bowls and everything measured out. And no, it doesn't take 10 minutes. It takes like an hour and 10 minutes. So yeah, don't be fooled, okay? All right, I think that's good enough for the cabbage. It'll still cook a little bit more when I put the mushrooms in. And I just throw the mushrooms in, and it's boiling, and when I throw the mushrooms in, it'll stop boiling because the mushrooms are cold. They're not like out of the refrigerator cold, but they're cool. And the mushrooms now, I just push them down so they get under the water because they want to float. Just go around and kind of keep pushing them down. My stove and oven are gimbaled, so this whole stove, it tilts, so when the boat's heeled over and sailing, it stays level. I need to lower this down. I built this myself. I used to have a galley made alcohol stove in here. It was what came with the boat when it was originally built, and I don't like alcohol. It cooks really well, but my alcohol stove caught on fire when I went to bed one night, and luckily I noticed it. And I noticed it because light was coming through my eyelids, and I was sleeping kind of adjacent from it. And there was the top of the galley made stove pulls open so you can get down to the burners and all the plumbing in there, the pipes for the alcohol, and so you can clean and do maintenance. And so there was a gap. I mean, it was only about 1/8 of an inch wide of gap from the lid to the rest of the body. And I went to bed, and I could see light going through my eyelid, and I opened up my eyes, and I just happened to be laying at the same level as that gap where I could see into the stove. And I noticed a blue flame, and I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? I'd cooked earlier that night, and I opened up the stove, and the whole stove was on fire. Not the burner, but the stove top alcohol was spewing out, and it was on fire. And I shut the burners off when I got done cooking, but they were leaking, and there was already a fire in there, and I just didn't see it. And so yeah. So I think in one of my previous videos I mentioned, okay, this is boiling now, and I'm just going to shut it down. I mentioned in one of my previous videos about alcohol stoves, and some marinas don't allow you to have alcohol stoves. This marina that I'm in right now does not allow you to have an alcohol stove. So beware, if you're looking for a new marina, you need to find out about that. And Some alcohol stoves are safer than others. There's ones that you just pour the alcohol into the burner, and it's not, I don't think it's pressurized. The one I had a tank with alcohol in it, and you had to pump it up and pressurize it, so that was the problem. I'm going to shut this off now. Okay, now, oh, it's boiling over. Whoa. But it's boiling over, but it's going into my saute pan and not on my stove. So that's why I like using the saute pan. I hope my smoke alarm don't go off. It'll go off from steam. But yeah, it just boiled. It just boiled over. Okay, that's okay. Now, you want, before you put the miso in, you want it to stop boiling. You do not want to put miso in boiling water because it'll make it bitter. So just let it stop boiling. Doesn't have to cool down. It just needs to stop boiling. And it only takes a minute or so. And so I built this this system together, this stove and oven. I got this Inductance 2-burner stove, and I got this, it's a Ninja oven. It's a full convection oven. And what's nice about it is because I'm going to be using electricity, I got to put solar panels up. I got 10 100-watt solar panels I got to put on this boat, and 2 wind generators. So I'll be able to cook with my lithium battery that I have here. And what's nice about cooking with this type of electricity is, or these kind of electrical appliances, is that they're really efficient. They heat up really fast and they cook really fast. I've cooked a 15-pound turkey in this Ninja oven, and it only took like an hour to cook it. And and then I took parts off the galley made, the alcohol stove, like this cage that goes around here. This keeps the pots and pans from sliding off. So it's just it's actually made out of it's stainless steel, I think. But anyway, it just creates a little guardrail around the top of the stove so pots and pans don't slide off. And then my galley mate also has these things that are pot holders, and normally they would go in the front, on the front, the bar here. But because of the size of this stove, it wouldn't work because this doesn't reach over far enough to get to where the burner's at. But I figured out I can put them on the sides, and because they're bent here, they will hold the pot in place. And so I just slide them, and they're adjustable. So like this one here, I don't know if you can see this, but I can slide it right up against here. So if I was out in the ocean and getting bucked around by heavy seas, that'll help keep anything from sliding and keep the pot right over the burner. And so now it's stopped boiling, and it's good. And now I'm going to put in the miso. I'm going to put most of this in here. I'm going to save a little bit. So actually, this is probably the amount I'm going to put in, but normally I put in a little more. But I think I'll save the rest of this so I can put it in later as I water it down in a day or two, just so I have more volume of soup. So I put this in and stir it around carefully and make sure this dissolves, because when you're eating your soup, you don't want a big glob of this, in your mouth. So, and it dissolves. It dissolves pretty easy. So I use my little knife here and just kind of move it around, and it'll sink to the bottom, and then I just kind of slice back and forth on the bottom here. So this is super easy, pretty quick. Usually, like I said, I can usually do it in about 45 minutes. Texture is perfect. The heat level is perfect. It's awesome. It's really good on cold, rainy days. I'm going to wash it down with some of the celery and lemon juice. That's all that's in here, celery. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I'm going to enjoy eating it. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. The more likes and subscribers I get, the more the YouTube algorithm will put me out there, so more people will see me and see my channel. And so that's how it works, and it doesn't cost anything.